Hi, it's Robert Mitchell at the Inlight Human Rights Documentary Film Festival here in Bloomington, Indiana. I'm here with filmmaker Bernardo Ruiz, who directed a film recently, Reportero. According to Reporters Without Borders, in 2000 to 2013, no fewer than 88 journalists were killed and another 18 have gone missing. And I was wondering what initially brought you to discover what was happening down there and why you chose to spend years of your life crafting and making this documentary.
Sure. So I was actually researching an entirely different film. I thought I was going to make a short film about a shelter for deported children, for women and children in the border city of Mexicali, which is right on the California-Mexico border. And when I began doing my research there, it coincided with the rise in violence that we know, unfortunately, all too well in Mexico today. And so when I was beginning to do this research, I realized that I really needed some context. I really wanted to understand what was happening in the region. And so I reached out to my contacts and I said, I want to meet a reporter. I'd like to meet someone who could help me kind of break some of this information down. And so through a series of contacts, I was introduced to Sergio Haro, who ends up being the kind of center of the film, the protagonist of the film. And I met him at a coffee shop, and I've said this a number of times, it always embarrasses him because he's a veteran reporter who covers, among other things, crime. But it was like a good first date. I just sat down with him, and within the first few minutes, I knew that I could, that I would like to build a film around him. So that was the kind of genesis of the film. I began kind of through this other route, and it took me to this story, and it ultimately ended up becoming a film about journalism, freedom of expression, and attacks on the press in Mexico.
The journalists we meet in this film are remarkable human beings. They're risking everything. It's a very dangerous environment. What compels them to keep working in these dangerous conditions? And what have you learned from them as people?
It's a great question as to why someone would risk so much to tell these stories. In the film, we learned that three of the main characters' colleagues have been murdered by organized crime groups. The head of the papers was set upon by 10 gunmen and ambushed and nearly murdered. So it is a really important question, why they keep doing what they do. I think each reporter and each editor in the film has a different reason. One of the things I learned from Sergio Haro, who's really the kind of main voice in the film, is that for him, it's really more of a calling than anything. He doesn't really want to do anything else. He's just a kind of stubborn, beat reporter, and for him, it's his life. He also feels like it's his piece. He's doing his part of his piece of the puzzle in pushing for some kind of basic social reform. His job, as he sees it, is to get information out there, but then it's ultimately up to courts, it's up to the international community, it's up to civil society, it's up to all of these other areas in society to actually create that change. But he feels like his part of his job is really about getting information out there. So first and foremost, he's a reporter. He wants to expose corruption where he sees it. He wants to kind of speak truth to power, challenge corruption, and get information out there. So, but really, at the end of the day, I think it's a kind of a stubborn desire to get information out there. So the newspaper is called Zeta, and it's the same name as the cartel, but they're two totally different things. The newspaper actually predates the cartel. So Zeta was called Zeta because the newspaper's founder had been basically fired from a newspaper called ABC. And he decided that he and a colleague wanted to start a new newspaper, and they said, let's go to the end of the alphabet. Let's go from ABC to Z. So in Mexican Spanish, Zeta is Z, basically. So that was the kind of birth of Zeta in Tijuana and Baja California. So that's its own thing. The organized crime group, the Zetas, were an organized crime group that were actually a part of an elite unit within the Mexican military, and they defected and they offered their services to the Gulf Cartel. And for a while they served as the Gulf Cartel's enforcers, and they broke off again and basically became one of the most violent organized crime groups and cartels operating in Mexico. So the recent capture of the head of the Zetas cartel, which has no relationship to the newspaper, this kind of major arrest points to a kind of recent strategy in the Mexican government to go after. It's called the Capo strategy. To go after high-ranking members of these organized crime groups. Some critics are saying that it's really not going to do anything substantively to change what's happening in Mexico. That it's basically you're going after the leaders, but that power vacuum is going to be filled by other bloodthirsty people, other people who want to assume that role, or these organized crime groups are going to splinter apart and form kind of splinter groups, so that it's not really doing anything structurally. Critics would argue it's kind of a window dressing. So the situation on the border and certainly in different parts of Mexico continues to be very precarious. Certainly there are many safe areas within Mexico, but if you look at states like Guerrero and Michoacan, Guerrero in particular is the state where 43 students disappeared in the fall of last year. There's certainly a growing and humanitarian crisis, certainly around disappearances and around a kind of rising number of homicides, unfortunately. So the situation really continues to be unstable in many regions throughout the country.
And one last question. It's a pretty broad question. So in an area such as this on the border that is deals with a lot of corruption and threats from organized crime, how do individuals and then society work together to create a more just society and a more peaceful area?
I think that's really the kind of $1 million question. I think that's the question that people across civil society in Mexico are asking. People in the international human rights community are asking what can be done to support communities in Mexico, many of whom have been very resilient in the face of some pretty horrific violence. I don't think anybody can claim to have the answer. One thing that I do think points to some kind of hope, if you can even call it that, is the work of certain human rights defenders in Mexico. And I actually just finished a new film. It's called Kingdom of Shadows, and it's going to premiere at South by Southwest in about 9 days. And that film braids together 3 stories about people in northern Mexico and Texas. But one of the central characters in that film is a nun named Sister Consuelo from the city of Monterrey. And she's a human rights defender who works with families of the disappeared, people who have lost relatives to the violence of the drug war, kind of the kind of most painful casualties of this pretty horrific conflict. But what she's doing is she's pushing the state government and pushing other actors to actually do something about this violence, to get some kind of justice, and pushing in a way that's garnered the attention of the international community. And if there's any kind of ray of hope or any kind of ray of light in all of this, I think it's people like Consuelo or people like the journalist in Reportero. There are these people who are kind of laboring invisibly in these corners in Mexico and getting things done in ways that maybe bigger institutions aren't. And so I think I'm not in any way suggesting that they're the only solution, but I do think they are a solution, and I think that their stories need to be amplified and kind of given a bigger international platform.